Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're looking at something really fascinating, the Baha'i Faith's perspective on unity.
Yeah.
And we're not just talking kumbaya unity here.
Mm.
We're talking about how this idea of unity can actually impact the structure of a whole society.
Yeah.
We've got some excerpts from Baha'i writings that go deep on inclusivity and respect across different religions and some really different ideas about justice.
Yeah. It's really interesting because these concepts in the Baha'i Faith aren't just like nice thoughts,
Yeah.
tucked away in some book somewhere. They really offer a practical framework for applying these ideas in your personal life and then zooming out to the level of society.
Yeah, and there's some points that just really blew my mind. Like, for example, did you know that Baha'is don't use words like unbeliever
Right.
or infidel? It's just
Yeah.
so different from how we often hear religion talked about.
It's really a fundamental difference in perspective. Those terms create a separation, an us versus them.
Mm-hmm.
But Baha'i teachings really emphasize the opposite, the oneness of humanity. The idea that we're all part of one human family, regardless of our beliefs.
It's like they're taking all those labels that have caused so much division and just tossing them out. And it's not just about being politically correct. There's a deeper principle here.
Exactly. Baha'is believe in the unity of all religions. They see all religions as part of one ongoing process of revelation from a single God, each religion playing a role in humanity's spiritual development or evolution. So instead of competition, there's a sense of shared heritage.
So imagine instead of all this arguing about whose religion is right, people from different faiths actually sitting down together, learning from each other and finding that common ground.
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't that be amazing?
I think a good example of that is some of the work that the Baha'i community has done with the World Council of Churches, collaborating on different projects related to peace-building interfaith dialogue, really focusing on shared values rather than, those doctrinal differences.
That makes sense. But yeah, I keep coming back to this other really powerful idea we see in these Baha'i writings. The one where Baha'u'llah, the founder of the faith, said, "The earth is but one country and mankind its citizens." I mean, how do you even begin to process that?
Well, it's a bold statement, but it really gets at this core belief that you see throughout all the Baha'i teachings, this interconnectedness of humanity. We're not just individuals living in separate nations.
Right.
We're all citizens of this one planet, sharing the same resources and facing the same global challenges.
So it's not just about getting along with your neighbor. It's about seeing the whole world as one giant community. But how does that work practically? I mean, we still have different governments, different laws, different cultures. Does this mean like a one world government?
Right. It's not about erasing all those differences or anything like that. It's about recognizing that shared humanity and working together to address the challenges that affect us all. Think about issues like climate change, poverty. Those things don't stop at borders.
So you're saying that to deal with those kinds of issues, you need that global perspective, a willingness to cooperate and see beyond just your own national interests.
Yeah.
But let's be real for a second. That's easier said than done, right?
It is.
I mean, just look at how things are going in the world today. It seems like we're moving further apart,
Yeah.
not closer.
Yeah. It's a long-term vision for sure. The Baha'i teachings acknowledge that. But they also offer a sort of roadmap of how we might get there. One key part of that is this idea of consultation, which is central to Baha'i decision-making, both individually and as a community.
Okay, so let's talk about consultation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious how this connects to creating a more just and unified society. I mean, we all talk things out with each other, right?
Yeah.
So what's so special about the Baha'i approach?
Well, it's really different from how we usually go about decision-making. Like, think about how arguments often go.
Oh.
We dig in our heels, try to prove we're right, win the debate.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely been there. But you're saying that Baha'i consultation is different.
It's about creating a space where everyone feels heard and respected. You're not going into the conversation trying to just push your own agenda. It's about finding what's best for everybody involved.
So instead of focusing on who's right and who's wrong, it's about finding that solution that actually benefits the whole group. But how does it actually work? Do you all just sit around in a circle talking for hours?
Well, there's actually a specific process for Baha'i consultation. It involves things like presenting your ideas, clearly listening carefully to others, detaching from your own ego, and striving for unity in the final decision. And importantly, there's this spiritual dimension to it, a sense of seeking guidance from a higher power.
Interesting. So it's not just a chat. There's real intention behind it, a spiritual element guiding the process toward a unified outcome. But how does this apply to building a more just and unified society? I mean, we can't force everyone on the planet to use Baha'i consultation.
Of course not. But the principles behind consultation can be applied in any setting, whether it's a family discussion, a work meeting, even on like a national or international level. It's about shifting our mindset from competition to cooperation, from self-interest to the common good.
So it's about bringing that spirit of consultation into all parts of our lives, from personal relationships to global challenges. And if we can do that, maybe just maybe we can start to overcome some of those divisions that seem so impossible right now.
Yeah.
But how do we even begin to apply these ideas in a world that feels so resistant to change?
It starts with each of us, with our choices, our actions, how we treat each other, how we handle disagreements, how we contribute to our communities. All of those everyday decisions shape the world around us.
Okay, so we've talked about these big ideas like oneness and unity and consultation, but let's get practical. How would these Baha'i principles actually play out in a real society? Like, what would a Baha'i-inspired community or even a government look like?
Well, if we could picture a society that really embodied these principles, I think one of the most noticeable things would be absolute freedom of belief for everyone. No coercion, no pressure to conform. That's like a bedrock principle in the Baha'i worldview.
So no more religious wars?
Yeah.
No forced conversions?
Mhm.
I like the sound of that. But beyond that initial freedom, how does justice actually work in this imagined society? We touched on that a little earlier.
Justice becomes like the foundation of the entire social system, and it has to apply equally to everybody no matter what they believe. So even in this hypothetical Baha'i-inspired society, Baha'is wouldn't get special treatment just because the system is based on their teachings.
No theocracy, then. That's a pretty unique stance for a religion, don't you think?
Yeah.
Most faiths, if they had the chance to shape a society, they'd probably put themselves in charge.
It's a really important distinction because true justice means everyone has equal rights and opportunities regardless of their background. And for Baha'is, this also means addressing economic inequalities. You know, the writings talk a lot about eliminating the extremes of wealth and poverty.
So it's not just about legal rights. It's about making sure everyone has the basics, like education, healthcare, a decent standard of living. Sounds a lot like what many social justice movements are fighting for today.
There are definitely some overlaps, but I think what's interesting is that Baha'i teachings offer this spiritual framework for social justice. It's not just about changing laws and policies, it's about transforming hearts and minds. You know, there's this emphasis on recognizing the inherent dignity in every single human being, no matter their circumstances.
So recognizing that connection we all have, that one person's well-being is tied to everyone else's well-being. But okay, let's be real for a second. Some people would probably say that trying to put these idealistic principles into practice in the real world is naive. Like humans are just too complex, too selfish. What would you say to that?
Well, the Baha'i writings are actually very realistic about the challenges of creating a just and unified society. They acknowledge that it's not going to happen overnight. It's a process. It takes consistent effort and a willingness to learn and adapt. And yeah, of course, human nature has its downsides. But Baha'i teachings also focus on the potential for spiritual growth. The idea that through education, through service to others, through trying to live by these principles, we can overcome our limitations and help build a better world.
So it's not about expecting some perfect utopia to just magically appear. It's about taking those steps to address injustices and divisions little by little. And it's not just about what governments or institutions do, it's about what each of us does as individuals, right?
Exactly. Every choice we make, every action we take have an impact. So even if we're not in positions of power, we can still make a difference.
Which brings us back to our listener who's probably thinking, okay, this is all very inspiring, but what does it have to do with me? I'm just one person in this complicated world.
That's where this idea of bridge building comes in. And I want to be clear, this is not about trying to convert people to the Baha'i faith. It's about finding common ground with people from all different backgrounds and working together for positive change. Baha'is are encouraged to be involved in their communities, to participate in things that address social issues, to advocate for justice and equality for everybody.
It reminds me of that story about Abdul-Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, who back in the early 1900s helped organize this massive food relief effort during a famine in Palestine. And he didn't just focus on helping Baha'is, he reached out to people of all religions and backgrounds because he recognized that human need goes beyond any differences in belief.
Yeah, that's a great example of the Baha'i approach in action. It's about actually putting those principles of unity and respect into practice, not just talking about them. And that's where the real power lies.
This has been a really insightful conversation. I feel like we've just scratched the surface. But for our listeners who might be hearing about all this for the first time, what are some of the key takeaways we can leave them with?
Well, I think we've really explored how the Baha'i faith emphasizes not just the oneness of humanity, but also the oneness of all religions. It's a truly global and inclusive perspective.
Yeah, and we talked about how these teachings reject those divisive labels that have caused so much pain and conflict, and how they focus on respecting the dignity of every single person.
And maybe most importantly, we looked at how these big ideas can actually be put into action, both on a personal level and in how Baha'is imagine a just and unified society.
And it's not about achieving some perfect utopia overnight. It's about working towards a more just and equitable world, one step at a time.
And it's a journey we're all on together. We all have a role to play in building a better future.
We've talked a lot about justice as a core value in the Baha'i Faith. So for our listener, I want to ask you, what are some of the places where you see injustice happening in the world today?
That's a question we all need to ask ourselves. And it's not about blaming anyone or feeling overwhelmed. It's about looking around at our communities or countries, the world, and identifying those places where the systems and structures are failing people.
And here's the real challenge for all of us. How might a Baha'i-inspired approach offer a new way of thinking about solutions in those areas?
I think it's about moving past those easy answers and knee-jerk reactions. It's about really asking the tough questions and considering how principles like unity, justice, and consultation could be applied to those situations.
It's about remembering that potential for love and compassion that we all have inside of us and using that to create real change.
Exactly. And it starts with changing our own thinking. Instead of feeling powerless, we can choose to believe that a better world is possible. And then we can start taking those small but meaningful steps. It could be something as simple as having a conversation with someone who sees things differently, or volunteering our time to a cause we care about.
This deep dive has given us a lot to think about. So for our listeners who want to learn more, get involved, maybe even see these principles in action, what would you suggest?
I would definitely recommend connecting with a local Baha'i community. They're very welcoming and always happy to share their perspective and experiences.
It's one thing to read about these ideas, but it's a whole other thing to see them lived out in a real community.
Yeah, it's a chance to have those conversations, ask your own questions, maybe even participate in some of the things Baha'is are doing in the community.
And who knows, you might be surprised by what you learn and by how much you can contribute. You know, as we've been talking about all this, I keep thinking about how much the Baha'i Faith emphasizes this idea of consultation.
Yeah.
It's not just like a suggestion. It's like baked into how they do things.
Right. It's really central to their whole approach. And it's not just talking for the sake of talking. It's about really trying to understand different perspectives and working towards unity in decisions.
And I can't help but think about how divided everything feels these days. You know, politically, socially, it's like everyone's just stuck in their own little bubble.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's where this Baha'i approach is so interesting. It's like a completely different way of looking at things. Imagine if governments, organizations, even just our local communities really embrace this idea of consultation.
So instead of just digging in our heels and attacking the other side, we actually try to see things from their perspective.
Exactly. It's recognizing that none of us have all the answers. We need to learn from each other to solve these big, complicated problems we're all facing.
It sounds pretty idealistic, I'll admit, but I gotta say it's refreshing to hear something that focuses on unity and collaboration instead of all this conflict and division.
It is. And it's not just about nice ideas. The Baha'i Faith actually offers practical ways to put these principles into action.
Oh, really? Like what? Give me an example.
Well, one example is their administrative system. It's designed to be really decentralized and participatory. You know, it prioritizes service over power, and decisions are made through consultation at different levels.
So you're saying it's built on trust and collaboration and this shared commitment to the well-being of the community.
Yeah, exactly. And while it's specifically for Baha'i communities, I think the principles behind it could be applied in all kinds of settings.
I see how all these pieces fit together now. The oneness of humanity, the rejection of those divisive labels, the focus on consultation and justice. It's like a whole vision for a more unified world.
It is, and it's not some far-off dream either. It's about taking real steps both individually and collectively to make things better right now.
So no just sitting around waiting for a miracle. It's about actually doing something.
Exactly. And that starts with each of us. Looking at our own prejudices, seeking out opportunities to connect with people who are different from us, making choices that promote unity and justice in our everyday lives.
That's a powerful message. And I think it's a perfect way to wrap up this deep dive into the Baha'i approach to unity and how it could actually impact the way we structure society and even govern ourselves.
Yeah. It's been great talking about all this with you. Hopefully it gives our listeners some new things to think about and explore.
And for our listeners, just remember that building a more unified world is a process. It takes patience and effort and that willingness to learn and grow together. We encourage you to keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, keep looking for those connections that print us together as human beings. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep diving deep.